Claire Monroe had always been a hopeful person. She looked at the world as if it could still surprise her with kindness. She loved her work as a designer and spent hours drawing soft lines and bright shapes on her screen. Her ideas were full of color and life, and she dreamed about opening her own design studio someday. At 26, she believed that talent and honesty were enough to carry her forward. Ethan Carter entered her life one spring morning when everything smelled of new beginnings. He was confident, with a warm smile and the calm voice of someone used to being listened to. He owned a growing design company that worked with big clients in the city. Claire met him at an art exhibit where he praised her sketches and told her that her ideas felt alive. A week later, he offered her a position in his company. That day, she went home shaking with excitement. She told herself this was what success looked like, a chance built on hard work rather than luck. Working with Ethan quickly became part of her heart. He noticed her details, remembered her favorite coffee order, and encouraged her to dream bigger. Many nights they stayed late together, sketching and planning, their laughter mixing with the noise of copy machines and faint music. People in the office began to whisper about the closeness that grew between them. Claire tried to ignore the glances because she told herself it was all harmless. Ethan had a girlfriend named Brooke Avery, beautiful, confident, and popular in fashion magazines. Claire reminded herself that love could stay professional. She wanted to believe that. But Brooke noticed the change in Ethan. She saw the way his messages came late, the way he spoke of Claire with a softness she did not like. Brooke worked in public relations and had a sharp sense for danger. She was clever and knew how to turn stories in her favor. When she found one of Claire's designs on Ethan's laptop, she felt jealousy tighten inside her chest. That was the start of a plan she would later call protection. A month later, Ethan's company suffered a serious data breach. Designs meant for their biggest client leaked online, costing them a huge contract and public shame. Someone had used her account to send the files to a fake address. The security team found traces that looked clear and simple, as if Claire had made a foolish mistake. When she saw the report, her hands shook. She simply sat down, silent, then said she should talk to the police. That silence cut deeper than any word. The investigation was short. The evidence pointed straight at her. Brooke stood in court, calm and dressed in white, saying that she had trusted Claire until that day. Ethan sat behind her, never meeting Claire's eyes. Claire said she was innocent, but nobody believed her. The company wanted to protect its name. The newspapers printed her photo with the words "design thief" under it. And when the gavel hit, sentencing her to 2 years in Graybridge Correctional Center, the world turned cold inside her chest. In prison, time moved differently. The walls were gray, and the air smelled of bleach and regret. The first nights she cried quietly into her pillow, wondering how love could ruin someone so completely. She replayed every moment in her head, every look, every word, trying to see where she had been blind. Yet the more she replayed it, the more she began to see clearly. She had been too trusting, too soft, too eager to please. And while she could not go back, she could build something harder, stronger, and smarter from what was left. Instead of giving up, Claire began to read every book she could find. She learned about business, design law, and digital protection. She even took a small art program that allowed inmates to paint. Her sketches changed. The lines were deeper, the colors sharper. When people asked what she was drawing, she said she was drawing silence, turning into power. The other women looked at her with respect. 2 years can either break a person or turn them into something new.
Oh.
For Claire, every sunrise behind those metal bars became a lesson. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. She learned that pain could polish a soul instead of destroying it. When the day of her release finally arrived, she walked out wearing the same clothes she had worn when she entered. Yet inside, she was someone else entirely. Her eyes no longer searched for approval. They searched for purpose. The city outside had moved on. New buildings rose, her old office had a new sign, and her name lived online as a warning story. But Claire was no longer the woman they thought she had destroyed. She carried something deeper now, a quiet promise she made to herself behind those prison walls. She would not seek pity or vengeance in loud words. She would rebuild quietly until the truth revealed itself. The story of her fall was over. What waited ahead was the story of her return. The bus stopped in front of the city station, and Claire stepped down, carrying a small bag and a folded letter from the prison officer who had wished her luck. The air smelled of rain and fuel, of people moving fast toward somewhere. She stood still for a moment, looking at the tall buildings that once made her proud. They looked the same, yet felt like strangers. She walked slowly toward a small motel near the river and rented a single room with plain walls and a narrow window. That night, she sat on the bed and wrote 3 words in her notebook: start from zero. The next morning, she went out to look for work. The world did not welcome her kindly. Many people remembered her name from the old scandal. At small offices, she could see the change in people's eyes once they recognized her. Managers smiled politely, then said the position had been filled. Claire did not beg. She thanked them and walked out with her head still high. She spent every afternoon reading job posts at the library computer. On the 5th day, she saw an advertisement for an assistant at an art restoration studio. They needed someone to handle files, clean brushes, and organize sketches for the artists. It was not the kind of creative work she used to do, but it was a chance. The studio was small, with warm yellow walls and the smell of paint that reminded her of calm days long ago. The owner, Mrs. Larson, was an older woman with kind eyes but a strict voice. She looked at Claire carefully when she handed over the resume that said she had taken an art course in prison. Instead of judging, Mrs. Larson nodded. She said that hands which have known mistakes sometimes learn precision faster. Claire smiled for the first time in weeks. She started small, washing brushes and preparing frames, listening more than she spoke. Every corner of the studio taught her something. She learned to remove small stains, to polish old frames, and to mix colors that could bring an old painting back to life. The calm rhythm of her days began to heal parts of her mind that had been bruised. She still felt the sting when people whispered behind her back, but it no longer controlled her. Each evening, she would sit by the window of her motel, sketching again on cheap paper. Her drawings showed faces turning away from fire, hands reaching toward light. Sometimes she read news online and saw pictures of Ethan and Brooke. They attended events together, smiling under bright lights. Their company now one of the fastest growing in design technology. Brooke's face appeared in magazines, titled as A Woman of Vision. Not from jealousy, but from the quiet reminder of injustice still unspoken. She did not hate Ethan. She did not even wish he would suffer. What she wanted was truth, plain and simple, truth placed before the world. A few weeks later, a new person joined the studio. His name was Jonah Pierce. He was tall and somewhat awkward, often carrying notebooks stuffed with old articles. He had once been an investigative journalist who lost his job after refusing to change a story about corruption. He came to the studio as a part-time photographer, taking pictures of restored art for exhibitions. At first, he kept to himself, focused and quiet. But one afternoon, while they worked side by side photographing an old mural, he asked about the type of art Claire liked before joining the studio. She hesitated, then answered carefully that she used to design digital layouts. His eyes recognized her name instantly. He did not speak for a long minute. Then he said softly that he had followed that case years ago and always thought there was something strange about it. His words made her heart slow down. Nobody had ever said that before. Most people believed everything written in the papers. Claire looked at him, unsure what to say, but Jonah continued. He told her that the pattern of data in her case looked like the work of insiders, not an outsider trying to harm a company. He had written a report about it, but it was never published. From that day, their conversations grew. They would sit after work at a small diner, drinking coffee that tasted slightly burnt but warm. Jonah asked questions carefully, never pushing too much. Claire told him pieces of her story, leaving out the pain that words could not carry. He listened with a seriousness that felt safe. She looked at the documents filled with technical details that only confirmed what she had always felt. She thanked him not with big words, but with a look that held quiet determination. As the days passed, Claire felt something awakening inside her. It was not the need for revenge, but the need for clarity. Life had given her a second chance, but she wanted more than just peace. She wanted her truth back from the shadows that had taken it. With Jonah's help, she began to collect small bits of information again. Each record, each name, each timestamp was a thread. She was patient, careful, and silent. One afternoon after work, he told her about a friend who still worked in digital security. He said this friend might be able to trace old company files that had been hidden or stored secretly. Claire hesitated. Luke carried a simple laptop that looked old but strong. Claire explained that she wanted only to check if the data used against her in the case had been changed in any way. Luke nodded and asked for some time. Over the next few days, they met in secret after work. Luke searched through archive records and digital traces that most people would never see. After 2 years of silence, here was the first solid piece that could break the wall around her. In the days that followed, Jonah and Claire began to collect more information. Claire used her knowledge of design documents to identify the hidden patterns in the leaked files. She marked small symbols and signatures that proved the designs were hers. Even with the excitement, Claire was careful. She still worked at the studio each day and joked with the team during lunch. They spread papers across the table while the waiter refilled their coffee cups. From that night, they called their search project on. Inside was a printed email between Ethan and Brooke, written a week before Claire's arrest. Ethan had begged Brooke to fix the mistake before anyone found out who really leaked the designs. Brooke told him to stay quiet and promised she would handle it. The words sat heavy on the paper. Claire felt both vindicated and heartbroken. The man she once trusted had known the truth, but had chosen silence. The truth was finally strong enough to speak for itself. She said they would use their words and their evidence in a place where lies could not hide anymore. The day of the company's 10th anniversary arrived with bright banners hanging across the tall building that once carried Claire's dreams. Expensive cars lined the entrance, and photographers stood ready to capture the famous faces. Inside, music played, and laughter echoed between glass walls. Brooke Avery was at the center of it all, shining in a silver dress, greeting everyone with her perfect, practiced smile. Ethan stayed close to her, wearing the same calm expression that hid more fear than pride. 2 streets away, Claire and Jonah prepared quietly inside a small rented office. The air was filled with tension, but also with calm purpose. The file that Claire had worked on for weeks was safe on the old laptop where every piece of truth now lived. Jonah checked the connections one last time. He had arranged for the evidence to appear on the company's screens during the CEO's speech. Every image and document would show the truth that had been buried for 2 years. Claire watched the clock and felt her heart beating slowly but firmly. She whispered once that they were not doing this for revenge but for fairness. Jonah nodded because he understood. Soon they left the office and walked toward the event hall. Claire wore a simple black dress and carried herself with quiet strength. The guard looked at them for a moment and then allowed them through. Inside, the air smelled of perfume and polished floors. Claire could see faces she recognized from past projects. Some people looked quickly away when they saw her, but she kept walking without pause. Brooke noticed her from across the hall. Her expression changed for a short moment before she walked over with a confident smile. She said in a clear, cold tone that she was surprised to see Claire after all this time. Claire looked back calmly and replied that surprises had a way of finding the right moment. They stood still for a second, their eyes locked like old rivals meeting in battle. Then Brooke laughed faintly and turned away, believing Claire had come only to watch. Ethan kept his distance, unable to find words for the weight hanging between them. The event began with speeches and applause. The lights dimmed and a large screen behind the stage came alive, showing the company's logo. Ethan stepped onto the stage to introduce the night's celebration. Brooke smiled beside him under the soft glow of spotlights. Jonah stood near the technical booth, holding his phone ready. He gave Claire a small signal, and she knew it was time. The moment Ethan began to speak about innovation and trust, the large screen flickered. The room grew quiet. The logo disappeared and new images appeared instead. People began to whisper as lines of text, emails, and financial records filled the screen. Claire's designs appeared, marked with her original symbols. Then came the private messages between Brooke and the IT employee who had helped her hide the leak. Every guest watched in silence as the evidence unfolded before them. Ethan froze on stage, his eyes wide and his breath shallow. Brooke stepped forward, trying to shout that it was false, but the proof spoke too clearly. Jonah watched as cameras flashed and people gasped. Porters began recording the screens, knowing this was the story of the year. Claire stood still near the back, her hands relaxed at her sides. She did not smile or cry. She simply let the truth take its place. As Brooke tried to disconnect the display, the system locked. The files played until the very last line, showing Brooke's signature and Ethan's silent confirmation of her plan. When it ended, the hall was full of broken applause, some in shock and others in realization. Security people moved quickly. Some guided guests out while others tried to stop reporters. Brooke's voice cracked as she turned toward Ethan, begging him to do something. He stood still, his face pale, his world collapsing before the same people who once praised him. He searched for Claire in the crowd, but she had already started walking toward the door. No anger marked her steps. She carried only the quiet pride of someone who had survived what was meant to break her. Outside, the night air was cool and soft. Jonah joined her near the street, his hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He said he had recorded the full projection and sent it to several news outlets to keep it safe. Claire nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant lights. She said that what was done, and now the truth belonged to everyone. Jonah looked at her with admiration. When the news broke hours later, the city buzzed with shock. Television channels replayed the files again and again, social media filled with messages of apology to Claire. People demanded an investigation into the company's actions. Brooke disappeared from public view while Ethan resigned, his face hollow in the press photos. Claire watched all this from her small motel room. There was relief in her heart, but also a calm sorrow for what love and trust had once meant. She closed her notebook, which now held the last notes of her plan, and placed it gently in a drawer. For years, the world had called her guilty. Now the truth had spoken without a single scream. She had no need for speeches or revenge. The noise outside could not reach the peace that had begun to grow quietly inside her. The next chapter of her life waited beyond the chaos of headlines and cameras. She had nothing left to hide, and that was her victory. The morning after the gala felt quiet, as if the whole city was waiting to see what would happen next. Claire woke up early and sat near the window of her small motel room. The light fell across the table where the newspaper lay open. Her story was everywhere. A headline said, "Innocent woman exposes corporate deception." Under it was a photograph of her taken at the event, her face calm, while screens behind her showed the evidence. She stared at the print for a long time, not for pride but for understanding. It was strange to see her own pain turned into words for the world to read. She dressed simply and walked outside, breathing air that finally felt free. People on the street looked at her with quiet respect. Some even stopped to say they were sorry for what had been done to her. She thanked them softly and kept walking. She did not want glory or attention. She wanted peace and a chance to build something new. Jonah met her near the park gate. He looked tired but proud. He told her that the police had opened a formal case against Brooke and the company's former technical team. Investigators had also called Ethan for questioning. Claire listened without excitement. She said she did not want to follow their downfall. She only wanted to close her old chapter and move forward. Jonah agreed. He handed her a folder holding the final copy of all their findings. He said it was hers to keep or destroy. She looked at it for a moment and then said she would keep it only as proof that truth always finds its place. Weeks passed and life began to calm. Brooke's name slowly disappeared from magazines. Ethan sold his shares and left the company. He sent Claire a letter, short and full of regret. In it, he wrote that he never had the courage to speak when it mattered. He wished he could change the past, but knew he could not. Claire read the letter once and placed it in a drawer beside the folder. She felt no hate, only a small sadness for what fear had done to him. Forgiveness, she realized, was not for his sake, but for her own heart to stay free. She moved from the motel to a small apartment near the water. The space was tiny but full of sunlight. She repainted the walls herself and placed her old sketches near the desk. She began designing again, entering small contests and taking freelance work online. Slowly, clients returned. Her reputation healed not from news but from the quiet strength of her work. People admired not just her art but the story behind it. Many wrote messages saying her courage had inspired them to face injustice in their own lives. She answered each one with gentle honesty, reminding them that truth takes time but never fades. Jonah often visited, bringing coffee and his usual pile of notes. He had started working again as a journalist, this time for an independent paper. Together, they began writing a small book, telling how false stories can ruin lives and how facts can save them. He wanted Claire's name on the cover, but she refused, saying that the story should belong to everyone who had ever been silenced. They laughed about it often, and their laughter filled the apartment with warmth that felt like home. One afternoon, Claire received an invitation from the Art Council for a local exhibition. They wanted to display her new collection of designs and paintings. The theme she chose was healing through truth. Each painting showed quiet strength, colors rising from darkness into light. At the opening night, people walked through the hall in silence, touched by the emotion in her work. When Jonah told her it was remarkable, she smiled softly and said that beauty only lives where pain has been understood. Later that night, she stepped outside into the fresh air. The river shone under the moon, and she thought of everything that had led to this moment. The prison bars, the cold nights, the betrayal, the loneliness, and finally the victory that came without anger. She understood now that her story was never about revenge, but about transformation. The world had imprisoned her for a lie, yet those years had given her truth that no one could take away again. Months later, her small studio became a known place for young designers who had lost their path. She taught them not only about lines and colors, but also about patience and courage. She told them that art must come from places where the heart has been tested. Her students listened carefully because her words carried the weight of experience. Claire's life was simple but full. Each morning she walked to the studio with a quiet smile. Children waved to her on the street. The city that once turned its back on her now called her a symbol of strength. But she never let fame pull her away from humility. She lived by the river, painted every day, and often met Jonah for coffee in the same diner where their plan had first taken shape. They would talk about news and laugh about small things. As time passed, her name no longer reminded people of scandal, but of truth and courage. She had turned her broken story into a song of renewal, not sung loudly, but felt deeply. When she looked in the mirror each night, she saw not the woman the world had judged, but the one who had reclaimed her own life with steady hands. The pain had become wisdom, shame had become art, and within her heart there was only calm light. The city slept peacefully outside her window as she closed her sketchbook and turned off the lamp. The darkness did not frighten her anymore. It felt like a soft reminder that light always returns to those who keep faith in themselves. She lay down to rest, knowing that her story was not of loss, but of discovery, the kind that shapes a soul for the better and teaches the world the quiet power of truth.